Since the beginning of the day, there have already been 100 combat clashes on the front line, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Russian troops are most actively assaulting in the Pokrovsk direction, and about 1,100 enemy army soldiers are concentrated in the city itself. This was reported by President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. According to him, Ukrainian defenders continue to hold their positions in the city. For more details on the situation at the front, stay tuned.
Russian authorities continue to claim that Kupiansk is supposedly under Russian control. However, the armed forces of Ukraine are holding the city, and about 100 remaining Russians there are surrounded. According to the Joint Forces grouping, back in November, drones with Russian flags were being massively dropped to the occupiers. This was done to create propaganda footage. Now such disinformation about Kupiansk is being spread to exert pressure and in hopes of unblocking the city. However, all such attempts have been unsuccessful. Russian mercenaries have been spotted in the Kupiansk direction, whose level of training is usually not very high. Some of these soldiers have already been taken prisoner. Russia is also using contract soldiers in the Kupiansk area. They have undergone training for about 2 months. These are people of average qualification who are not professional soldiers. Viktor Trehubov, head of the communications department of the Joint Forces Group, speaking on the United News Marathon. Meanwhile, in the Lyman direction, the enemy army attacked Ukrainian positions near the settlements of Novoselivka, Mirn, Drobyshev and Stavki. Near Kostiantynivka, clashes took place around Pleshchevka, Rusinoyar, Sherbinivka, Oleksandr Shultin and towards Sofiyivka. And on the Pokrovsk section of the front, Ukrainian defenders repelled Russian assaults near several settlements: Myrnorod, Rodinske, Kotlina, Udakhna, Filia and Novopavlivka.
If we talk about Pokrovsk, the Myrnorod agglomeration, about Kupiansk, about Vovchansk, Lyman, Seversk and Huliaipol, Stepnohirsk. These are the main locations where the enemy is trying to break through our defenses. However, as I already mentioned, they are not succeeding. Moreover, in the urban battles of the Pokrovsk-Myrnorod agglomeration, it is clear that the Russians, despite enormous pressure and a significant numerical advantage in manpower, are still stuck. Today they are bogged down, specifically in urban combat. I'm not even talking about the situation near Kupiansk, where our counter-sabotage special operation is underway and the enemy is being pushed back. In general, on the outskirts of the city of Kupiansk, it is obvious that the Russians will continue to launch intensive attacks on all our directions.
For a month and a half, a Ukrainian ground drone from the 3rd Assault Brigade went on combat duty instead of infantry using machine gun fire. It suppressed all enemy attempts to break through into its area of responsibility. At the same time, the operators controlled the robot from a safe location. Ukrainian defenders note that during the mission, the Russians were unable to either slip through or break the defense. And the soldiers held their positions with 0 casualties among personnel. At the same time, operators of strike drones from the Perun Battalion of Unmanned Systems, part of the 79th Separate Air Assault Tavria Brigade, destroyed a large-caliber D-20 howitzer of the Russian army southeast of Myrnorod. After hitting the gun twice, the pilots proceeded to conduct further reconnaissance and discovered enemy soldiers who were trying to evacuate the remaining ammunition in a van. However, they too were struck by Perun's drones. Due to massive losses in equipment, Russian occupiers are now forced to launch assaults on horseback. Ukrainian defenders have released drone footage showing 2 riders on horseback. However, the breakthrough attempt by the Russian cavalry did not succeed. It was stopped by pilots of the 92nd Separate Assault Brigade. Meanwhile, at a Russian military airfield near Lipetsk, 2 Su-30 fighter jets were hit. According to the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, the planes were set on fire right inside a protective hangar and were completely put out of commission. The special operation was planned for about 2 weeks. The total value of the destroyed aircraft could reach hundreds of millions of dollars.
For the defense forces today, the defense forces of Ukraine, there are no locations that we cannot reach, whether it's with missiles or with drones, accordingly. Today, the decoding of where things are hitting is not always completely accurate, but we can see the effectiveness of these strikes. It is very high. Well, just look at the aviation. How many enemy aircraft are being destroyed on the ground? And these are combat units, not old equipment, as they say, that can't even take off. This is combat hardware that, among other things, threatens the south of our country by carrying out strikes with air-launched missiles.
And in the past 24 hours alone, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated 1,120 Russian occupiers. In total, over nearly 4 years of full-scale war against Ukraine, Russia has lost more than 1,197,000 military personnel. In addition, 3 tanks, 2 armored vehicles, 10 artillery systems, and 64 units of enemy automotive equipment were destroyed.
Ukraine's defense forces also struck ammunition depots as well as locations where Russian occupiers store and launch attack drones. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. According to the military, a Ukrainian missile attacked a temporary base for boats of Russia's 92nd Brigade in Olenivka in temporarily occupied Crimea. A large-scale fire broke out there. The Ukrainian Armed Forces also struck an ammunition depot of a motorized rifle regiment in the temporarily occupied part of Donetsk region. Preliminarily, the facility has been destroyed. In addition, in the Donetsk area, storage and preparation sites for attack drones used by Russia to strike Ukraine were hit. Ukrainian drones also struck the marine oil terminal near Taman in Russia's Krasnodar Krai. The attack using strike drones was also confirmed by the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. As a result, equipment at the terminal as well as the portal were hit. The infrastructure damage led to a large-scale fire. The military noted that the Taman complex is one of the largest in the Black Sea region. Its total volume of petroleum products and liquefied gas exceeds 1 million cubic meters. The terminal itself is located 6 kilometers from the Kerch Bridge, and in Moscow a car was blown up. The car belonged to the head of the Operational Training Directorate of the Russian General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. As a result, Lieutenant General Fanil Sarvarov was killed, according to Reuters. The explosion occurred in the courtyard of a residential building after the military officer got into the car and started driving. Preliminary reports indicate that a homemade bomb had been placed under the car seat. According to Russian media, the general participated in Russia's war against Ukraine as well as in combat operations in Chechnya and Syria. Sarvarov has become the 3rd general to be killed in the Russian capital this year. Shevchenkove, Kharkiv region is located 30 kilometers from the combat zone. Many of those who were forced to evacuate from Kupiansk have found refuge here. Russian troops periodically shell the settlement, but shops, the market, and pharmacies continue to operate. Natalia Belokudria will tell us about the situation in the Frontline village. And the prices?
I think our prices are affordable.
76 hryvnias?
Yes, these are 76 and these are 69. Tatiana shows the selection in the store. She says they have everything when it comes to groceries. After the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, several departments had to close. But the woman tries to provide her regular customers with everything they need.
We work, we go to work. Our prices are a bit lower than everywhere else. That's why people come to us from the other end of the district to do their shopping, and people come from the villages too.
Kama, a pensioner, is from Kupiansk himself. Fearing for his safety, the man left the city with his family as it is currently under attack by Russian forces. He says Kupiansk is badly damaged and it was dangerous to stay there.
Don't leave, don't enter, don't look. Those are volunteers. They go there and help the people who stayed behind. That's how
We do live. And where exactly is your house?
we don't know about the house. What's going on with the house? We're 25 kilometers away, living in a village.
Despite the ongoing Russian shelling, Kama is aware of the successful counteroffensive by the Ukrainian Armed Forces in Kupiansk. And he believes that the city where he lived for 36 years will endure.
Everything will be all right. Victory will be ours.
In Shevchenkov, you can hear the front from afar. But here the market, pharmacies and stores are operating without interruption. People are receiving their pensions and humanitarian aid. Hennedy, 72 years old. He's from Mariupol. He says he's already adapted to life near the front line.
Now it doesn't seem so bad, but at first it was so bad that glass would fly out of the windows. Everything happened. Of course, well, now you hear it. Somewhere in the distance it's banging and rumbling. That's all. Well, here, thank God, everything is still okay for now. There's nothing so extreme that you'd have to run somewhere.
Guys, hold it a bit lower and you over there do something. Come on, let's pull it tight.
To protect vehicles from Russian drones, anti-drone nets are being installed on the road leading toward Kupiansk.
We're stretching the nets so the drones can't fly through. It's protection so that there's at least some kind of safety for vehicles here.
Strengthening air defense in the Kharkiv region is one of the top priorities in Kharkiv and the surrounding area. As long as people are safe, work to protect infrastructure and the civilian population here is ongoing. Natalia Belokudria, Andrei Domovoy from Kharkiv region for Freedom TV channel.
And now to other important news of the day. If Vladimir Putin rejects efforts to establish peace in Ukraine, Washington should significantly increase pressure on Moscow. And US President Donald Trump should provide Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles to strike military factories on the territory of the Russian Federation. This opinion was expressed by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham on NBC News.
If Putin says no, then this time I hope President Trump will do the following. He will sign my bill, recognize Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism for abducting 20,000 Ukrainian children. And more importantly, he will detain ships transporting sanctioned Russian oil, just as is done with Venezuela. If Putin says no, we need to radically change the rules of the game, including providing missiles, Tomahawks to Ukraine so that it can strike missile and drone manufacturing plants in Russia. In that case, I would go all in.
Today, the negotiation team is returning to Kyiv after meetings in America with representatives of President Trump. And as early as tomorrow morning, I expect a full report on the prepared documents. This was stated by Volodymyr Zelenskyy, commenting on the negotiations between the Ukrainian and American delegations in Miami. The president noted that in the US, they managed to discuss a number of important documents, including future security guarantees for Ukraine.
In my opinion, everything possible that we needed to do for the initial drafts has already been done. There are 20 points in the plan. Perhaps it's not perfect, but the plan exists. There is a separate document between us and the United States of America, bilateral security guarantees. It is these guarantees, as we see it, that should be considered in the US Congress with some details and classified annexes. I've seen the initial drafts, and honestly, almost 90% of the annexes that matter to us are there. What can our army and Ukraine expect after signing such guarantees? How strong can we become? And all of this looks quite impressive. Basically, the core section of all the documents, in my opinion, has been formed. There are certain things we're not ready for, and there are points I'm sure that the Russians won't agree to. The Americans stayed at the negotiations with the other side, the representatives of Russia. They will have discussions and then we'll get feedback from them.
Negotiations with the American side in Miami have been constructive, reported Rustem Umerov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, who I remind you is heading the Ukrainian delegation. Over the past 3 days in Florida, the Ukrainian team has held a series of meetings with American and European partners. In addition to Umerov, Ukraine is represented by the Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces, Lieutenant General Andriy Ignatov. On the U.S. side, Trump's Special Representatives Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner participated, as well as a White House staff member, Josh Greenbaum. The purpose of the meetings is to coordinate a common strategy for Ukraine, the U.S., and Europe.
The main focus was on 4 key documents: continuing work on the 20-point plan, coordinating positions on the multilateral framework agreement on security guarantees, coordinating positions on the bilateral security guarantees agreement from the US, as well as continuing work on the economic development plan, the prosperity plan. Special attention was given to discussing the timeline and sequence of further steps. Ukraine remains fully committed to achieving a just and lasting peace. Rustem Umerov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
After consultations between U.S. representatives and Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Florida, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and U.S. President Donald Trump held telephone talks. According to the press service of the British Prime Minister, the main topic of discussion was Russia's war against Ukraine, specifically efforts to achieve a lasting peace. Starmer also informed Trump about the work of the coalition of willing countries and added that it would support only a just peace solution. The U.S. delivered an unequivocal message to Russia during closed-door talks in Miami. This was reported by Kyiv Post, citing informed sources. The closed meeting between representatives of the White House and the Kremlin did not lead to any breakthrough decisions regarding a ceasefire. At the same time, according to the publication, the American side presented Moscow with a list of additional demands and expectations that are of a decisive nature. Sources emphasize that Washington made it unequivocally clear that the further course of events depends entirely on Russia's decision. The war must be ended as quickly as possible and the right solutions should be sought. This was stated on Freedom TV by Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine. According to him, the key is to force Russia to make peace and above all, new sanctions are needed.
As for the American discussion, the domestic political debate, we periodically hear quite sharp debates in Congress, and we hear rather strong public statements not only from Mr. Graham, but Blumenthal, for example, often comes forward with initiatives regarding the use by the United States of tools to pressure Russia. Therefore, returning to Graham's statement, yes, absolutely, only coercion and the cost of war. It's very important to understand here that it's not just about tomahawks. Yes, that's part of it. Of course, it's important to expand the range of Ukraine's long-range capabilities, meaning to provide the tools that will allow them to destroy infrastructure on Russian territory and deep inside Russia at that. So first and foremost, the main thing is to make the war much more costly for Russia. And that means sanctions, once again, prohibitive sanctions.
Financial and military assistance to Kyiv will be a priority for the European Union in 2026. This was stated by the leader of Cyprus, Nikos Christodoulidis. It is Cyprus that will preside over the EU Council in the first half of next year. The president also is promised to facilitate the swift implementation of the white paper on the future of European defense. Andrei Dimitrenko will continue on this topic.
Support for Ukraine and the implementation of a strategy for the militarization of Europe. These will be Cyprus's plans for its presidency of the EU Council, stated the President of the Republic, Nikos Christodoulidis. According to the rotational principle, on January 1, 2026, Nicosia will assume the presidency of the Council of the European Union. Cyprus understands the modern challenges it faces. Regarding the security and unity of the EU, the President of the Republic said, in the 1970s, the country experienced several foreign interventions and now 40% of the island's territory is occupied. Nicosia understands Kyiv's situation, stated Christodoulidis.
In the next 6 months, support for Ukraine will remain a priority for the Cypriot presidency. Of course, it could not be otherwise, considering that we, the Republic of Cyprus, have direct experience of what an invasion means, what occupation means, what the violation of fundamental principles and rights means.
On December 4th, Nikos Christodoulidis paid a working visit to Kyiv to discuss the 6-month presidency of the EU Council with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Nicosia fully supports Kyiv's European integration, as well as strengthening Ukraine's defense capabilities, because the fate of all Europe depends on this, the President emphasized, of Cyprus.
The peace process should contribute to advancing effective and substantial support for Ukraine from the Council of the European Union. I would like to emphasize that Ukraine's security is directly related to us. It is connected to the security of the entire European Union. I believe we have already proven this with our actions, our support, and by standing on the side of Ukraine.
We discussed this in great detail in the general part. We discussed the overall European agenda in great detail. Now Europe is developing a new global role for itself. All the events that have been happening for almost 4 years now indicate that Europe's role must truly be strong. It depends on each nation, on each leader. Ukraine has given Europe a significant unifying impulse, and this energy is working for European strength. And it will continue to be this way. We expect that the European community will also stand with Ukraine in the way that is necessary to achieve peace and guarantee reliable security.
Cyprus will also focus on implementing the Readiness 2030 plan, which aims to strengthen the EU's defense capabilities by the end of the decade. Among other things, the strategy provides for the transfer of ammunition, air defense systems, drones to Kyiv, as well as the training of Ukrainian troops on the territory of the European Union. In addition, the EU countries have agreed to allocate 90 billion euros in aid to Kyiv for 2026 to 2027.
For the years 2026 through 2027, we all have one clear goal: a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. We have gathered with a clear purpose to resolve Ukraine's urgent financial issues for the next 2 years. And I am very pleased to announce that we have succeeded. We have reached an agreement that will allow us to meet Ukraine's financial needs for this period.
Individual EU countries are ready to provide additional assistance to Ukraine beyond the pan-European initiatives. The Swedish government has made adjustments to the country's budget and increased funding for Kyiv to $200 million. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga thanked Stockholm for its leadership in providing direct budgetary assistance. Kyiv is at the center of Sweden's international policy, according to the government.
We are reallocating resources from many parts of the world, and above all, to Ukraine, because Ukraine is facing existential challenges and Sweden's interests are connected to this. This means that if Ukraine can continue to defend itself, the risk of Russian drones, Russian fighter jets, and Russian soldiers appearing is reduced. On the territory of Sweden, this risk will decrease.
Lisbon is ready to allocate 50 million euros under the Pearl program for the purchase of weapons. For Kyiv, announced Ukraine's Minister of Defense Denis Shmyhal after talks with his Portuguese counterpart. In addition, the country will allocate 25 million euros annually for a similar program called SAVE. On December 21st, a meeting took place between the presidents of Ukraine and Portugal. At the meeting, Luis Montenegro stated that his country is considering the possibility of sending its military contingent to Ukraine to ensure compliance with a future peace agreement between Kyiv and Moscow once it is concluded.
Germany's Federal Criminal Police Office has recorded more than 1,000 incidents involving unidentified drones this year. Most often, the UAVs flew over military facilities, airports, and critical infrastructure. The agencies note that the purpose of these operations is to cause concern or even sow panic among the population. They also emphasize that the drones could have been gathering information, for example, about the movement of troops. There is also a new security initiative in Germany. For next year, it provides for strengthening measures to combat hybrid threats from abroad. According to German media, Federal Minister of the Interior Alexander Dombrit announced active measures against external threats, terrorism, and organized crime. According to the official, Germany needs to counter digital attacks, disinformation, and sabotage more effectively, especially threats coming from Russia. A legal framework is currently being established in the country for this purpose. They also plan to complete the so-called Cyber House next year. This project provides for the automated protection of Germany against cyber attacks. Russia is developing new anti-satellite weapons to block the operation of the Starlink system, which plays an important role in providing communications for Ukraine on the battlefield. This is according to data from 2 NATO countries' intelligence services, reports the Associated Press. According to intelligence, this concerns so-called area effect weapons. These involve deploying hundreds of thousands of small projectiles in orbit, capable of simultaneously disabling several satellites, Starlink. However, this creates the risk of large-scale damage to other space systems. Analysts warn that the use of such weapons could cause chaos in space, posing a threat not only to Western countries, but also to Russia itself as well as its allies and in particular China.